Hat, sunglasses, Pepsi, notes, sources, thick skin. Check. You already know. Let's go. Welcome to Golden Blue today, everybody. This is a college football channel. So if you like college football, hit the like and subscribe button. It's that simple. Also, send gear to represent your team and be a part of my background forever. All you have to do is send it to P.O. Box 360, Liberty, South Carolina 29657. And don't forget to check out our Patreon page. We have a lot of great perks over there. The perk that people seem to enjoy the most, of course, is the score prediction contest where we award $20 every single week to whoever gets closest to the actual score of the game that I pick. We also did a championship week. I will award $25 to that winner. And right now is the best time to join Patreon because we are going to do the bowl prediction contest. First place prize will win $50. Second place prize is an autographed Golden Blue Dude flat bill hat. And the third place prize is a shout out. And the more Patreons we get, the higher we can bump up the prize. So if we get up to $300 worth of Patreon pledges, we will bump up the prize to $75. If we get up to $400 worth of Patreon pledges, we'll bump the prize up to $100, and so on and so forth. So there's even an incentive for current Patreon members to encourage other people to join Patreon. That way the prize goes even higher. I'll leave the link to the Patreon page in the description of this video. So I'm sitting here in the car line again, trying to figure out what video I wanted to do in the car. I've already done a couple other videos, but I wanted to do one more, and I got it. Well, bowl season is coming up, so let's talk about some bowls. The SEC in particular. Last year, the SEC didn't do well at all in bowl games. And I know, the SEC fans, well, we won the games that did matter, the playoffs and the national championship. I understand that, and congratulations. But overall, in bowl season, you did terrible. Including the national championship, you went 6-8. Not including the national championship, you went 5-7. So either way, bad. And you started off 1-5. So you got off to a bad start. So the 5 winners. The first one was South Carolina that beat North Carolina in the Duke's Mayo Bowl, which that was a good win. I won that pick. A lot of people were picking North Carolina, but I took South Carolina, and South Carolina won. Then, of course, the 2 playoff games. Alabama beat Cincinnati in the Cotton Bowl, the first round of the playoffs. Georgia beat Michigan in the Orange Bowl in the first round of the playoffs. Kentucky beat Iowa in the Citrus Bowl. That was a good win for Kentucky. Arkansas beat Penn State in the Outback Bowl. That's a good win as well. And then, of course, Georgia beat Alabama in the national championship. So that was a win and a loss for the SEC. What about the losers? There were more losers than winners, right? Well, the first loser that got the SEC off to a bad start was Missouri. They lost to Army in the Armed Forces Bowl. Then there was Florida. They lost to UCF in the Gasparilla Bowl. Yeah, that's how far Florida has fallen. Auburn lost to Houston in the Birmingham Bowl. So they actually had home field advantage, and they still lost to a group of 5 team. Mississippi State got blasted by Texas Tech in the Liberty Bowl. Tennessee lost to Purdue in the Music City Bowl in one of the best bowl games of the year. Ole Miss got blasted by Baylor in the Sugar Bowl. LSU lost to Kansas State in the Texas Bowl. And of course, Alabama lost to Georgia in the national championship. So that was the loser side of the SEC when it came to the 2021/2022 bowl season. What about this year? What about the 2022/2023 bowl season? Well, the SEC made 11 bowls this year. And here's how I think the SEC will do this year. First, we'll start off with the Las Vegas Bowl. The matchup is Florida, who finished 6-6, against number 14 Oregon State, who finished 9-3. I actually think this is a mismatch. But let's look at the stats. Florida averaged 31.8 points per game, which is 43rd, not a bad offense, and allowed 28.8 points per game, which is 91st, so a terrible defense. Oregon State, they averaged 32.4 points per game, which is 37th, so a better offense, and allowed 21.4 points per game, which is 31st. So a much better defense, and Oregon State is favored by 10. I think Vegas knows what they're doing in this spread. I think Oregon State absolutely drills Florida, and y'all know that I've been high on Oregon State the entire year, and I warned y'all. I told y'all that Oregon State was going to finish in the top 20. They had a couple of losses that knocked them back out of the top 25, but they finished strong, and they proved me right. Oregon State could finish in the top 10, depending on what happens above them. The next bowl is the Gasparilla Bowl. We have Wake Forest, who finished 7-5 against Missouri, who finished 6-6. Wake Forest averaged 36.8 points per game, which is 16th, so an elite offense, but allowed 29.2 points per game, which is 94th, so not a good defense. Missouri, they averaged 25.5 points per game, which is 83rd, terrible offense, and allowed 25 points per game, which is 57th, about an average defense. I think the edge belongs to Wake Forest. This will be a close game. Missouri will battle, and I do think Missouri has a chance to win this game, but I still got to take Wake Forest, and Vegas has Wake Forest as a 2.5 point favorite, so I'm taking Wake Forest. So far that's 0-2 for the SEC. Next up, the Liberty Bowl. SEC didn't do well in the Liberty Bowl last year. This year we have Kansas, who finished 6-6, against Arkansas, who finished 6-6. Vegas actually has Arkansas as a 4.5 point favorite. Let's look at the stats. Kansas averaged 34.2 points per game, which is 27th, so a pretty good offense, but allowed 33.8 points per game, which is 119th. Terrible defense. offense. Arkansas averaged 30.7 points per game, which is 51st. Not a great offense, but not terrible, but allowed 28.8 points per game, which is 90th. So they also have a terrible defense. The edge goes to Kansas with a much, much better offense. Having said that, yes, Arkansas could win this game, but I'm giving the edge to Kansas. That's 0-3 for the SEC. Next up, the Texas Bowl. We have Texas Tech, who finished 7-5 against Ole Miss, who's 8-4. Vegas has Ole Miss as a 4-point favorite. Let's look at the stats. Texas Tech has been averaging 33.6 points per game, which is 32nd. Not a bad offense. And allowed 29.5 points per game, which is 97th. That is a bad defense. Ole Miss is averaging 34.2 points per game, which is 28th, so a little bit better offense, and allows 24.2 points per game, which is 50th. So a little bit better defense. I have to give the edge to Ole Miss. So that's 1-3 for the SEC, in my opinion. Next up, the Gator Bowl. We have number 21 Notre Dame, who finished 8-4 against number 19 South Carolina, who's 8-4. Notre Dame is a 3.5 point favorite. You guessed it. Let's look at the stats. Notre Dame has averaged 30.7 points per game, which is 52nd. Not a great offense, but not terrible. And has allowed 21.8 points per game, which is 32nd. So a pretty good defense. South Carolina is averaging 31.7 points per game, which is 45th. So a slightly better offense, but they're allowing 27.5 points per game, which is 78th. So a much worse defense. This is a coin flip game, but going by the stats, I have to give the edge to Notre Dame. So that's a 1-4 start to the SEC. Very reminiscent of last year. Let's move on to the Orange Bowl. Number 6 Tennessee, who finished 10-2 against number 7 Clemson, who finished 11-2. Clemson is a 7-point favorite. Tennessee is averaging 47.3 points per game, which is number 1 in the nation, and allowing 23.5 points per game, which is 45th in the nation. Clemson is averaging 34.7 points per game, which is 25th, and allowing 20.1 points per game, which is 17th. I would pick Tennessee if DJ Uiagalelei was starting for Clemson, but he's not. He's actually in the transfer portal. Klubnik will be the starter for Clemson, so I have to give the edge to Clemson. Clemson looked like a much better team under Klubnik. However, it wouldn't totally surprise me if Tennessee won this football game, but I'm giving the edge to Clemson, so that means the SEC starts off 1-5, which is the same exact start that they got last year. Let's see how the SEC can finish. Next up, the Sugar Bowl. Number 5 Alabama, who finished 10-2 against number 9 Kansas State, who finished 10-3. Alabama is a 3.5 point favorite. Alabama averages 40.8 points per game, which is 4th, and allows 18 points per game, which is 9th. So they have a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense. Kansas State averages 33.2 points per game, which is 33rd, and allows 20.1 points per game, which is 18th. This is going to come down to, does Alabama want to be in this game? If they do, then Alabama is the better team, and I do think Nick Saban has them focused for this game, so I'm actually going to give this to Alabama. That puts us at 2-5. Next up, the Music City Bowl. It's actually a rematch. Iowa, who finished 7-5, against Kentucky, who finished 7-5, same as last year. Kentucky, the 2.5 point favorite. For Iowa, they have a terrible offense, averaging 17.4 points per game, that's 123rd, but their defense is pretty good, allowing 14.4 points per game, which is 6th. For Kentucky, their offense is not much better, averaging 22.1 points per game, which is 106th, but a pretty good defense as well, allowing 19.1 points per game, which is 12th. These stats are very, very similar. This is a coin flip, but in this game, I'm going to give the edge to Kentucky. So that pushes the SEC's record to 3-5. 3 more bowls to go. Well, next up is the ReliaQuest Bowl. This is number 22 Mississippi State, who finished 8-4, against Illinois, who finished 8-4. Mississippi State's a 1 point favorite. They averaged 32.7 points per game, which is 36, pretty good offense. Allowed 24.2 points per game, which is not a bad defense. Not great, but not bad. For Illinois, they averaged 25.4 points per game, which is 84th. Not a good offense, but allowed 12.2 points per game, which is first. So they do have the best defense, but I don't trust that Illinois offense, so I give the check mark to Mississippi State. So that puts the SEC at 4-5. Next up, the Citrus Bowl. Number 17 LSU, who finished 9-4 against Purdue, who finished 8-5. LSU, the 8 point favorite according to Vegas. LSU averaging 32.3 points per game, which is 38th, and allowing 23.7 points per game, which is 46th. So a decent offense and a decent defense. For Purdue, they averaged 28.1 points per game, which is 70th, not a good offense, and allowing 24.6 points per game, which is 53rd. Not a great defense either. I have to give the edge to LSU. So that pushes the record for the SEC to 5-5. We're at 500. On to the playoffs. First up, the Fiesta Bowl. Number 4, Ohio State, who finished 11-1 against number 1, Georgia, who finished 13-0. Ohio State is averaging 44.5 points per game, which is 2nd. So they have a really good offense, and they allow 19.2 points per game, which is 13th. That's a pretty good defense. Georgia's averaging 39.2 points per game, which is 11th. That's a pretty good offense, and allowing 12.8 points per game, which is 2nd. This is also a coin flip, but I think the defense of Georgia will be able to hold Ohio State's offense down to enough points to where they can win this football game. I'm giving the edge to the SEC. So it comes down to the national championship, and I have number 1 Georgia against number 2 Michigan. These two teams are evenly matched. Let's see what the stats say about this game. Let's start with Georgia again, averaging 39.2 points per game, which is 11th, and allowing 12.8 points per game, which is 2nd. What about Michigan stats? Well, Well, they're averaging 40.1 points per game, which is 7th. So they do have a better offense and allowing 13.4 points per game, which is 5th. The defenses are about the same. This could come down to offense, and I think Michigan actually has a slightly better offense. I would actually give the edge to Michigan. Yes, I do think Michigan wins the national championship this year. I think last year they weren't ready. They were good enough to get there, but they weren't ready to compete at the highest level when it comes to the playoffs. This year they're ready, and I do think Michigan wins the national championship. So this means that the SEC finishes 6-6. That is better than last year's, but not much better. Of course, last year they finished 5-7, unless you include the national championship, which is still 6-8, a losing record. So 500 would be better than last year. So y'all let me know in the comments section, how much better do you think the SEC will be in the bowl season this year? And which one of these bowl predictions for the SEC do you disagree with? That's all I got for you for this show. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you on my next show.